Our text for today is from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. This is the word of our Lord. So in this text, we have Paul talking about our life of faith, but talking about it in terms of athletics. And you may have seen this. This was just a week or two ago. There was a bulletin that went out that Simone Biles, if you're familiar with her, she's an American gymnast, and she had set a record for the most gold medals in an international competition. They were in the international, the national championships, and she got 5 gold medals. 5 gold medals in there. No one had done that before. She is already the most medaled gymnast in history, and depending on how she does in the upcoming Olympics, she could become the most medaled athlete in history. And it's amazing to watch what she can do in gymnastics. She even came up with some of the moves that she did on the beam herself as some new things in order to secure those medals. And it's just phenomenal. You watch this, or you watch any of the athletes. You can flip on the Bucks game and see, well, maybe not the Bucks, but you can flip on other athletes.
Well, you can watch the other team.
You can see some amazing performances. Honestly, even the worst of the Bucks players plays 100 times better than we would ever play. In fact, I've heard it said that the average American couldn't last even one play in the NFL because of how intense it is and the amount of physical strength that it takes to play. But we look at and we see these athletes all the time, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, gymnastics, whatever, doing these amazing things. But it's important to remember they didn't just walk out there. Simone Biles didn't just show up in the arena one day and say, you know what, I feel like being a gymnast today, and win 5 gold medals. She's been training. And she's been training for years, dedicating her life to this training, and in all kinds of ways, controlling the food that she eats, doing certain exercises that not only build general strength but help her with those specific skills. All of these different things that she does in order to be able to do what she does. And here, Paul is comparing our life of faith with athletics, and specifically for him, for a race. And in the very first line, he says, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? So run in such a way as to get the prize. Now, to start, let me be clear. Paul is not saying here, only one of us gets into heaven, so you better be the best. That's not what he's saying. And it's a good thing, because we'd all probably have a lot of trouble with that. Right? But what he's saying is he's bringing into mind, look at what the athletes do when they race, and how focused they are on winning that race, and that should be your attitude towards your life of faith. It kind of reminded me of the Jamaican bobsled team. If you remember the Jamaican bobsled team, right? That whole thing kind of happened about 30 years ago now. If you've seen the movie Cool Runnings, you've seen an idea of what was going on there. But it kind of shocked the world. All of a sudden, here's Jamaica, this tropical island, right, coming out with a bobsled team. They don't have ice unless they make ice. You're kind of like, wow, how in the world are you going to compete with all of these countries that have mountains and ice and all these things? But there they were. And they came out with their bobsled team. Now, do you think they were just out there to just be in the race? They weren't. But a lot of the people, the announcers and the commentators, that's kind of what they focused on. They were like, it's just amazing that they're even here in the Olympics. That's a feat unto itself. But that's not what they were thinking. They wanted to win. They just didn't want to show up and be in the race. They wanted to win the race. And so actually, as you look at their history, I was doing a little research on it, right? The first year was a little rough. But then by 1994, they took 14th place, but they beat out America, Canada, and Russia in that year. We've got ice. We've got mountains, and they beat us. In 2000, in the international push competition, which is the bobsled competition, in Monaco, they took first place. They got the gold. They were there to win. You know, despite the fact that they came from Jamaica, they wanted to win that bobsled race. And here Paul is saying, run in your life of faith like that. Not just satisfied to be in the race. And I think sometimes, you know, as Christians we do that. We're like, hey, I'm saved and that's awesome. Good enough. Paul's saying, no. Run. Run the race. Run it with passion. Run it with vigor. Train yourself. And he goes into this, he talks about training and, you know, not running like someone who runs aimlessly, not like a boxer who beats the air. I strike my body in order to make it a slave. Right? That he is going to control himself. And he's talking about the training, the discipline of applying. And you think about all of the things that we do to train ourselves in life. You know, we can talk about the Simone Biles of the world. And, you know, I was looking at her training. She gets up, eats a very specific breakfast that gives her a lot of carbs, and she spends 3 hours a day in the mornings running through routines. And then she eats a lot of protein for lunch, and then goes back for hours more, like 3 or 4 hours of running the routines again. They do cross-training, all these different things, in order to be able to do that. But we all do training. Right? If you went through school, if you went to college, by the time you graduate, that's 16 years. Or for some of us, 17 or 18. You know, depends. I had a roommate who stretched that one a little further. But years and years of training in order to get a job or have some of the skills that we need in life. We do this in sports. In fact, I brought with me today, right here, this is the best that I've gotten so far. I don't have a gold medal, but I have this trophy. I have a couple of these actually. This is for T-ball, 1984. Right? Little plastic trophy. They try to make it look like metal. It's not gold. Little plastic trophy. Before this, I went to practice a couple of times a week. We went to every game. We played ball out in the yard with my brothers, or my dad would teach me some tips on how to swing and how to hit and all these things. There was training that went into that for that little silly little plastic trophy. Paul's saying, look at all the effort that athletes go through, or that any of us go through, for all these things that are just temporary. And what we are doing in our life of faith is eternal. It's eternal for us, but it's also eternal for others in the way that we bring that gospel message to others. Saying we go through all this effort for all of these things, but what are we doing for our life of faith? Run that even more so, like the athlete who is training and doing all these things in order to be the best. Train yourself. And you think about what athletes go through. They have exercises that they do. They have some general exercises, like with Simone, she did the CrossFit stuff and all that. But then there are specific exercises, things that they do specific to the skills that they have. You know, so for her, and I just keep going back to her as my little representative, but you know, she's not out there spending hours and hours making sure that her swimming form is perfect, because that's not where her skill and her passion lie. You know, you get like a Michael Phelps, and he'll do that, but he's not spending hours on the, you know, on the bars and all this kind of stuff, because that's not where his skills lie. Each of us have been given skills and passions by God, spiritual gifts that we can develop as well. So there are general things that we can do, things like being in the Word and in prayer, coming to worship, being in Bible studies. But then there are specific things that we can do where we can explore what is it that God has given me. In what ways has God given me to serve in his ministry? And it talks about this a little bit in Romans that we read in our epistle reading, where it describes us as the body of Christ. It says there are members in the body of Christ. There are many different members, different people with different abilities and different skills, different gifts, according to the grace that it was given them. So he talks about prophecy, he talks about serving, teaching, encouraging, giving, showing acts of mercy. All of these things are different skills, different passions that God has given. But we're not all supposed to have all these things and do all these things all the time. Rather, the intent is that just like a body has different parts and all of them work together in order to have a healthy and thriving body, we, having different gifts and different passions, come together as the church and work together in order to have a healthy body. That is about the ministry. And what does it talk about? That we have been given the ministry of reconciliation, of bringing that good news of Jesus Christ both to each other and to the world out there that doesn't know him. But we are to work together. And so when we think about this race that Paul is talking about that we're running, this life of faith that we have, this isn't a race that we run on our own. Rather, it is a race that we run together. Where as we're running, if one were to fall down, the other can come and pick them up. Where we are having different abilities, different skills to work together in order to be about the ministry that God has given us. To bring about that saving message of Jesus Christ. And it's important to note that this is what we do as the people of God. Right? And so, like I said at the beginning, Paul's not saying this is how you get into heaven. This isn't like the only way to get there is that you got to do all these things, but rather, now that you are called, now that you are a child of God, this is how you live. It was Christ who gets us into the race. It is through him, because we could never qualify. We would never be able to get into the race, but he brought us in. And I like to think of this in terms of an adoption. The Bible uses that analogy as well. That it's like if you were a homeless child who's living on the streets. You may beg, you may steal, you're probably going around in tattered clothes, you don't bathe very often because you can't, all of these things. But then if someone comes along and adopts you, brings you into their home, loves you, provides all that you need, then you get to live as a person in that home, as a child in that family. You don't have to go out and live like you used to live. Right? To do so would be kind of silly. You have this home. Why would you go back out and do that? And this is like what Paul is saying here. Now that you are here, now that you are in this race, but you have been brought in through the blood of Jesus Christ, now run. And run with passion. Run with faith. And we see Christ doing this himself. He ran with that focus. And that faith. We see it as he sets aside heaven to become man, to humble himself and become one of his own creation in order to bring our salvation. We see it when he is tempted by the devil, and the devil says, guess what? I will give you everything, all these nations, all yours. Jesus says, no. No, I'm here. And we see it as Jesus is heading to Jerusalem that final time. And the scriptures say that he set his face towards Jerusalem. And that phrase, set his face towards Jerusalem, it doesn't just mean that he kind of glanced up like, oh, look, it's Jerusalem. But rather it's saying that he now had a focus. He was determined. He knew where he was going. It's kind of like the runner coming around the bend in the race and seeing that finish line and just focusing in on that finish line and running with everything they have to cross that line. And Jesus ran. He ran even though it meant that he'd be running through beatings, that he would be running through the mocking of the crowds, that he would be running through death itself. He ran and he won. He was victorious. He beat death and hell and the devil, and he beat them all flat. But he didn't just beat them and would be victorious for himself, but rather for us, as he secured the victory for us through his life and his death on the cross and his resurrection. And then he says that we get to be about his ministry on earth. That we get to run. We get to be in the race. You know, I think about how we imagine that and how we consider that sometimes, that sometimes it can feel like a burden. But I also think about like a Simone Biles or someone like that, and just the passion and the joy. She doesn't do that because she has to do it. She does it because she loves doing it. And some days are harder than others. You know, she talked about one point that they were doing cross training and they would make them run a mile in like a very short amount of time. I don't remember what the time was, but they had to run a mile and then they'd bring them right back into the gym and set them on the balance beam and have them do a beam routine. It's like I couldn't hardly stand. My legs were like jello, and then they're telling me to do a balance beam. I'm sure that wasn't her favorite moment. That felt more like pain and struggle. But it moved her along. It trained her. She said it got easier and easier as we did it, and as my body got more able to do it. Right? It trained her. And that's the kind of thing that Paul is talking about. The training that we do. What will we do? Will we treat it with the same vigor, the same passion that we do other things in our lives? Because it's amazing what God has in store for us. It's amazing what he can do. There's so much greater reward than all these other things that we focus on. And he has given that to us as a gift.